Hello everyone, and thank you for waiting. My name is Pascal Bello, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the CCAC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Today we'll be sharing with you some instructions on how to fill the CCAC Animal Use Data Form, which is also known as the AUDF. As you know, this webinar was planned to take place 2 weeks ago, but issues experienced by our provider prevented us from holding it, and we unfortunately had to postpone it to today, so we apologize if rescheduling this webinar created some inconvenience for you. But the good news is that these issues have been resolved, and we're happy to offer today's webinar. But before we start, I would just like to mention a couple of things. First of all, if you have any difficulties, mostly technical difficulties, either to see or hear the webinar, you can dial a toll-free number. So that would be 1-866-998-6710, or there's also a direct number, 1-805-617-7071. And you can mention the ID of this webinar, which is 119-759-979. And in order to maximize the quality of today's audio, we would ask you to please remember to ensure your speakers are at the desired volume, to keep any electronics like cell phones away because they can interfere with the devices. Speaker devices, and to unplug any device such as a webcam that may have a built-in microphone. So that will improve the audio for sure. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, but all participants are in a listen-only mode during the presentation. Once again, this is to ensure we have the clearest audio possible. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. It's quite the contrary. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation by typing them in the question pane of the control panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. So if you just type them there, we'll receive them and compile them, and we'll save them basically for the question and answer period at the end of the presentation. And also during the webinar, you'll see poll questions popping up on your screen, so we'll be launching them. And we would, of course, appreciate your responses to these questions. You'll have probably like 10 seconds each time to answer them. So please don't forget to submit your answers. And without further ado, I will pass the microphone to our speaker today, and that's Dr. Jilly Griffin, CCAC Director of Standards.
So good day everybody, and welcome to the CCAC webinar, which has been designed to provide information on completing the animal use data form. So today what I want to do is to spend some time with you going over the purpose of the animal use data and the recent changes that have been made. In doing so, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the required elements, all of which are detailed in the online instructions document. And I want to finish by talking briefly about the publication of the 2011 animal use data and about how you could use this data at your institution. So first, to start with, I want to remind us that the mandate of the CCAC is to act on behalf of the Canadian public to oversee the ethical use and care of animals in Canadian science. And I think this is particularly important to remember in the context of the animal use data. The animal use data has always served as a way to communicate with the Canadian public about the use of animals in science. It's a means of providing generic information that gives some understanding of the extent to which animals are used and the potential for pain and distress. Feedback that we receive at the Secretariat when the data are published usually reflect public concern about the numbers of animals and the types of animals used. Generally, there's concern about the numbers of non-human primates, And there's also concern about dogs and cats and the source of those animals because they're companion animals. As well, we received comments about concern in general about levels of pain and distress. The animal use data is also useful to the CCAC as a means of monitoring changes in the numbers and species of animals used, as well as other elements. We use this information when making decisions about prioritizing guidelines to be revised or developed. For example, we prioritized working on revision of guidelines on the care and maintenance of mice because of the large numbers of mice that are used, and on guidelines on the care and handling of non-human primates because of public concern about those animals. The data also helps us to identify areas of particular welfare concern where animals are likely to experience the most pain and distress. For example, a few years ago we were able to determine that around 40,000 mice per year were being used in a lethal assay for shellfish toxin testing. Knowing that replacement methods were available, a CCAC research fellow carried out a project that identified the challenges to implementation of the new methods, and then we worked with international colleagues that saw the introduction of a chemical analytical method. So for the CCAC to be able to use the data in these ways, it's really important to ensure that the animal use data is as accurate as possible. In addition, in 2011, the Canadian Institutes for Health Research and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council challenged the CCAC to be more proactive in developing metrics that could be used as indicators of the impact of the CCAC program. The animal use data has the potential to reflect the effectiveness of the CCAC program. The shellfish toxin testing case is an example where we use the data to identify an area requiring work, and moving forward we can now see a difference in the number of mice reported to be experiencing extreme pain and distress. Similarly, when the CCAC guidelines on choosing an appropriate endpoint were published in 1998, we saw a shift from animals experiencing extreme pain and distress, likely because in adhering to the guidelines, better monitoring and earlier termination of studies was being implemented. Again, this underlines the importance of having accurate data. So, moving forward, there'll be an increased emphasis for sure on the quality of animal use data, which will continue in the years ahead. In addition, in line with changes to the entire CCAC program, we are trying to improve our efficiency through streamlining animal use data entry and to increase our effectiveness through the provision of more accurate annual statistics. We hope to be able to provide quality data that can be used by institutions as well as by the CCAC in order to improve animal welfare in science in Canada. But we can only do so with your help. As in previous years, a memo was sent out in December requesting that institutions report their experimental animal use data for inclusion in the CCAC annual national statistics. So here we go with our first polling question, and I want to ask you how many of you remember receiving the memo. And so if you can indicate using the yes or no buttons to let us know whether you did receive the memo. It went out sometime in December with the instructions document in the Excel file.
So now more than half of you have indicated your response. We're close to 60–70% voted, and so far it's above 70% yes. So the majority of you have seen the memo, so that's good.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's great news. And so those of you that did see the memo will know that the changes that we've introduced this year for submission of the 2013 data are, 1, the use of an Excel spreadsheet, and 2, a new instructions document which details the elements that need to be completed. I want to emphasize that there are actually no changes to the required elements. These have been requested since 1995 when the animal use data collection system was originally revised. But the major change this year has been to request institutions to submit their data on a standard Excel spreadsheet. So here we go with another polling question. Out of interest, how many of you already submit your data using this standard format? That is, in an Excel spreadsheet with the headings as listed by the CCAC. And so people are beginning to vote.
Yeah, so 60, 75 of you are voting. So far, we're approaching the 70% yes again, just a bit shy of 70. So we're close to almost everyone has voted now, and it's mostly, I'd say 65% have indicated that yes, they are submitting data using the Excel format.
Thank you. So that's super. And it leads me to ask a next question, which I hope that you will all participate in answering, even if you are already submitting using the Excel spreadsheet. What I'd like to know is how many of you will find it a challenge to submit data according to this format. So if you already do submit the data in this format, please just indicate no to say yes, it's not a challenge. Obviously, you're already doing it, just so that we have a better idea of the percentage of you that are likely to find it a challenge.
So, Julie, I think you'll be happy to know that for more than 70%, it won't be a challenge. So for 9%, it will be a challenge, and 20% are not sure at this point in time.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, for this year, we do really encourage people to do their best. So at the CCAC, when we receive the data, it's checked. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then we incorporate it into a master spreadsheet. So if we receive the data in the standard Excel spreadsheet format, then we can just merge the data and not type the numbers in manually. Obviously, this saves CCAC staff considerable amounts of time that we can then direct to other projects. But perhaps more importantly, it also means that the possibility of errors is minimized, thus improving the accuracy of the final data set. So what happens when we receive the data? This flow chart gives a picture of the process that we go through at the Secretariat. Once we receive the data, we'll acknowledge receipt, and we carry out a quick scan. We send out any requests for corrections and/or missing data, and then we convert all non-Excel animal use data forms to an Excel format where possible. Then we carry out the first validation. We check things like cats and dogs being correctly identified, noting any species names that require clarification, comparing the category of invasiveness to the protocol description or keywords, and the same for the purpose of animal use. A second validation is then carried out by a different staff member who reviews all the items flagged in the first step. And then institutions are contacted if any discrepancies are noted, and corrections to the data is made before we combine all the data and prepare it for publication. So as you can see, it's quite a lengthy and a complex process, and it involves around 11,000 animal use protocols from some 200 institutions. So back to the form. And what I'm going to do for the remainder of this session is just to go through the form briefly to give a little bit more information and perhaps to provide a bit more clarity on the various elements required. Each of the elements is listed in the instructions document with a brief explanation. And the instructions, both the instructions document as well as a standard template, will be permanently housed on the CCAC website. So the first required element is a unique protocol number. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? But I can tell you that sometimes we receive data without protocol numbers, and having a unique number is particularly useful when we're verifying the information, but it's also useful at the time of assessment visits so that panels can ask questions of particular protocols. So back to the form. And the next required element is the category of invasiveness. Category invasiveness are to be assigned according to the CCAC policy statement on category invasiveness in animal experiments, which is on the CCAC website and which we've also included in Appendix B of the instructions document. For field studies, category of invasiveness should be assigned according to the CCAC categories of invasiveness for wildlife studies, which can be found in the CCAC guidelines on the care and use of wildlife. And also we've included that as well in Appendix B of the instructions document so that you have all the information together. As the categories are intended to reflect the potential impact on the animals themselves, there's a difference in categories of invasiveness for wildlife studies, where the impact on the animal just from handling is generally much more severe than for laboratory animals. So here I'm only showing a portion of the animal use data form just for simplicity's sake. This is an example drawn from the instructions document. And it's important to know that it's the key words that help to validate that the correct category invasiveness has been assigned. Therefore, words such as in this example, major surgery and chemical exposure should be included either in the keywords or in the protocol description. So in this example, animals have undergone surgery and have been exposed to a chemical prior to being killed, and so are in category of invasiveness D. It's important, I think, to remember that in the CCAC data, it's the potential for pain and distress that is reported. So even if some of these animals did not actually experience pain and distress because they were in a control group which wasn't exposed to the chemical and where any pain or distress associated with the surgery was managed, they still are reported at category of invasiveness D because of the potential for pain and distress. Atypically, a protocol may have more than one part, and so may have an initial phase, for example, where animals are not undergoing surgery. In this case, the protocol could report more than one category of invasiveness with the correct numbers of animals associated with each category. However, I want to stress that this is a rare occurrence. It's important that we don't over-report the amount of pain and distress experienced by the animals. So in general, it's much better to have smaller, more specific protocols reporting the appropriate category of invasiveness. So the next required element I want to talk about is the purpose of animal use. And there are 6 purposes of animal use listed here, but currently we only require institutions to report purpose of animal use 1 through 5. These purposes of animal use, again, are further defined in the instructions document, this time in Appendix D. So again, I'm just showing a portion of the template for illustrative purposes. And this again is an example from the animal use data form instructions document. It's important here to note that it's the protocol description that helps us to validate that the correct purpose of animal use has been assigned. Therefore, descriptions such as this should be included in either the protocol description or in the keywords. And I want to stress also that it's important to always report the primary purpose of animal use. So, for example, if the investigator is going to use 3 of those animals in the example shown as an opportunity to teach his students how to gavage and blood sample, this should still be recorded as purpose of animal use because those animals are also involved in the research study. Again, rarely, it's possible to have 2 purposes of animal use in a protocol if they're clear parts of the protocol. But for the sake of clarity, both at the institution level and for CCAC, it's much easier to have two separate protocols with different purposes of animal use. So the next element I want to talk about is the protocol description. In the form, you'll notice we have boxes for protocol description and for keywords, although we're only requiring that one of the columns be completed. Ideally, we would like both, but we recognize that institutions have evolved their systems to produce one or the other. So the protocol description should enable the reader to be able to clearly identify the purpose of animal use. This is used by the CCAC to ensure that the purpose of animal use has been correctly assigned. The one change that we have requested is for protocol descriptions of regulatory tests to identify the name of the regulatory test itself. So for example, it might be an OECD test guideline 403, which is an acute inhalation toxicity test. This enables us to identify where animals are being used, which are requested by regulatory agencies, despite alternative methods being available, and hence then enables us to work with our regulatory agents and international colleagues to have the validated alternative methods accepted. If keywords are not used as well, the protocol description needs to provide sufficient information to be able to determine what procedures have been carried out on the animals, and hence also allows us to verify the category of invasiveness. So the next element I'm going to talk about then is keywords. So similarly, the list of keywords are intended to be used to easily determine the procedures that have been carried out on the animals. The keyword should easily identify the procedures carried out and should help establish the category invasiveness. Again, if you're not using a protocol description, then the keywords should also reflect the purpose of animal use, so this too can be verified and is clear. We have provided a list of keywords in the instructions document, and I don't think you'll be able to see this on your screens very well, but it's an extensive list in the document. But it's not exhaustive. These keywords are intended as examples, and institutions should feel free to use any additional keywords. However, obviously the more keywords are standardized, then the easier it is for us to search the database later if we want to look for particular procedures, etc. So please consider using the examples as much as possible. So just to sum up here, ideally we would like both a protocol description and keywords. The protocol description tends to give information about the purpose of animal use, and the keywords tend to give information about the categories of invasiveness. So if you're only using the protocol description, please be sure to include sufficient information about procedures. And if you're only using keywords, please be sure to include sufficient information about the types of studies. And this only benefits you in the long term, as it also saves us from having to call you for clarification. So back to the form again, and the next required element is the animal genus and species. In general, it's fine to use the common names of animals, and this is particularly helpful for community representatives on assessment panels who might not have a science background. However, it's also important to be specific. So in order to have accurate, meaningful data, we need to know whether animals were wild or held in the laboratory, for example. We also need to know the types of animals in order to provide the level of detail in the annual statistics. So here we are, we have another polling question coming up. You probably know that we recently published the 2011 data, so I wanted to ask you how many of you have already accessed the sortable Excel file with the 2011 data on the CCAC website. This was posted, I think, at the end of December, and if you can indicate whether you've already taken the opportunity to look at it, or not by indicating yes or no on the button, and we'll see how the polling's doing.
So now we have 85% of you have voted, and the majority is indicating that no, they haven't had the chance or taken the time to look at it yet.
Okay, so when you do go and check it out, you'll see that there's considerable detail in the Excel file that we've posted, and that requires the data, requires the data being input to be accurate, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But first I just wanted to mention protocols involving the use of cats and or dogs. And it needs to be specified on the animal use data form whether the animals were acquired from a random source, in other words, whether these animals were generally obtained from pounds or humane societies, or were the animals of students or clients, or whether these animals were purpose bred, in other words, whether they were bred specifically for research, teaching and testing, either by a commercial supplier or within your own or another institution. And this information should be specified in the species column where there's a drop-down menu. So here you are. Here's a picture of a portion of that sortable Excel file, which is currently posted on the CCAC website. And here what I'm using it for is just to give you an idea of the level of detail that we publish. So you can see here in the screenshot that cats are listed as both purpose-bred and random. And we've done that because we certainly receive a lot of questions about the use of companion animals. So when you're providing information to us about those animals, it's really important to be as precise as possible. So here we are, back to the form again. And the next required elements are the numbers themselves. So the numbers of animals that we request are the number of animals used in that particular calendar year. If the protocol reuses some animals that have been used in the same calendar year, please indicate the number of animals that have been reused in addition to those that have been used. So in this protocol you can see that 20 animals were used, but there was also a number, 10 animals that were reused from another protocol. And we ask that you record the protocol number of the first use in that calendar year. This helps the CCAC to be able to calculate the absolute number of animals used each year. So for this reason, we ask for the protocol number of the first use so that we can subtract those animals that were used again in another protocol. Now this next element is not something that we actually require, and that's the number of animals reused from a previous year. We're interested in just publishing numbers of animals used within a calendar year to make it clear for the public. But we've included this column because a number of institutions are keen to ensure that we are aware that the animals being reported are not new animals. So in order for you to be able to explain this to us, we've left the opportunity for comment in the final box. So you can see here that 5 macaques were used in this protocol, but they have been in the facility for a number of years. Okay, so we published the 2011 data on the CCAC website in December. And so here we are with another polling question. We sent out a capsule when we published the data, but what I'd like to know is how many people have seen the summary report of the 2011 data. And that's, again, that's posted online. So if you could indicate either yes or no, so that we have a sense of how many of you have seen the summary report.
So now we have received more than 85% of the votes, and it appears that, once again, a majority hasn't seen it. So it was published at the end of December, so maybe it's lost somewhere in your inbox. That's possible, but you're more than welcome to go on the website and have a look. So because the 2011 data are the most recent ones that we have published so far.
But it also prompts me to remind you as well that you know, maybe you didn't receive it because for some reason we don't have the correct email address for you. If there are ever any changes in email addresses or changes in personnel, we would really appreciate it if you could let us know, so that we're sure to make to send out emails and notifications and etc. to the right people, and so that you do receive information from us. Anyway, when you do get the opportunity to check out the summary report, you'll find that it's been published in a different format than we have done previously. Our aim is really to publish easily understandable statistics, but also to provide a level of detail that permits anyone interested in those greater detail, the greater level of information, to access the generic raw data. So we've published details of the types of animal used, categories of invasiveness, and purpose of animal use in the summary report. And so the changes that we've made to the presentation of the data, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but it includes the use of simplified names for animal groups and different graph formats, which we hope will be more easily understood by the public. And in addition, as I've already mentioned, we included a downloadable sortable Excel file which contained a further breakdown of the numbers, which provides greater transparency again for the public, but it maintains confidentiality for individual institutions and investigators. So in the 2011 publication, data publication, we've been able to show the types of animals used, as I said, using simple animal names, clearly indicating here, as you can see, that fish continue to be the species most used in Canada, along with mice. But this chart also shows that in 2011, the animals of most concern to the public, dogs, cats, and non-human primates, accounted for only 0.6% of animals used in Canada. So here's a chart that we published on the purpose of animal use. And you can see clearly, I hope, from this chart, that by far the most use of animals in Canada is for fundamental studies at 61%, with only 4% of animals used for education and training. And here is the chart of category of invasiveness. This chart shows the potential level of pain and distress experienced by animals in Canada in 2011. And you can see from this chart that in 2011, only 3.9% of animals were reported as having the potential to experience extreme pain and distress. Obviously, as I mentioned, this is the area of greatest concern to the public. And so it's also the area where CCAC puts a lot of emphasis in the implementation of the 3 R's. So I hope following the webinar that you will have an opportunity to go and look at both the summary report and the in-depth Excel spreadsheet. So again, this is a screenshot of the sortable file which I showed you before. And I just wanted to stress that if people are interested in greater detail, then they're able to sort the data themselves using from the Excel file. It's possible to sort data by any of the categories listed above. So you can sort by animal type, by common animal name, by category invasiveness, purpose of animal use, and etc. So for example, you could determine how many random source cats were used for teaching in category invasiveness B protocols in 2011. So our aim really is to publish compiled data that in time can be used for comparison across years and between countries. We also intend to continue to use it to monitor trends in the types of animals and in the uses of those animals in order to continue to work on improving the welfare of animals across Canada. With the 2012 data, which we are currently analyzing, we will also be calculating the number of animals used and reused to give accurate numbers of animals actually used as well as providing numbers of animals used at each category of invasiveness and for each purpose of animal use. And we believe that this will provide more complete information for the public. So I want to finish by reiterating my request for your help. We're hoping to steadily improve the accuracy of the animal use data with your assistance. At the CCAC, we've already done some work at the back end so that we now have a much more workable database. The animal use data was developed originally back in 1995 with the additional intention of helping assessment panels to identify areas where they might want to focus during assessments. The new database should permit us to provide assessment panels with more information and provide you with generic information about your institutions at the time of an assessment visit. We aim to be able to provide information to you on animal use at the local level, generic comparisons with institutions of the same type, and focus on areas where the potential for the most pain and distress is identified. So this should not only have benefits for our goals of our improving accountability, but we hope will also help institutions help themselves. So we really welcome your feedback on the inputting process, as well as on the publication of the data and its usefulness to your institutions. So if you do have any questions about the animal use data form, or indeed any comments following this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact my colleague Wendy Clarence, who will be pleased to provide assistance to you. So I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Pascal, who's going to read some of the questions that I hope we've been receiving some during the webinar. Yeah.
Actually, we've received many questions, and maybe I could start with Shirley's question, which was how do the rest of us that indicated no get the instructions booklet? So, of course, we will send the instructions document to all webinar participants. It's also on our website in the AUDF section, and in the email we'll include the instructions document and links to the websites and links to all the documents we've been talking about today. And we'll also ask in that email that those of you who did not receive it to let us know who you are, and we'll of course verify and make sure that your email and name are included in our database. And please feel free to let us know of any member of your animal care committee who doesn't receive our emails. Please let us know their names and email address, and we will make sure they are in a database. So I hope it answers that question. You should receive all the instructions and relevant links shortly. And so we have time, I think, for probably 5 or 6 short questions. And we'll start with Julia's question, who's asked, can the Excel spreadsheet be in PDF, or is it preferred in the Excel format?
As far as I'm aware, and I'm not the person that does the donkey work, of course, but as far as I'm aware, it's much preferable to have it actually in an Excel format itself. I think if it was in a PDF, we would have to then convert it back to un-PDF it in some way. We probably have the ability to do that, but I would have to go to Wendy and double check with Wendy, and I'm sure that unfortunately Wendy can't be with us today, but I think that she would say that it's much preferable to have it in an Excel spreadsheet format.
I agree. I would bet on this answer too. Steve had a question. He said, we use a spreadsheet, but the reuse questions are new to me.
Yes, unfortunately, I think although these questions, these elements have always been asked, and they've always been asked since 1995, the document that they were contained in, which was called the Interpretation Bulletin, was quite buried, I have to say, on the CCAC website, and I think people found it really difficult to access. and so some of the elements were sort of new. Now we've been sort of perhaps putting a little bit more emphasis on the animal use data at the CCAC, both because of trying to provide increased public accountability, as well as trying to use the animal use data for metrics purposes. And so in doing so, and revising the whole way that we were handling data here, we developed the instructions document and tried to clarify things. Now in time I understand that the instructions document and the Excel spreadsheet will be put in a place on the website that's much more easily accessible, so it shouldn't be difficult to find moving forward. And we recognize in 2013 that there are going to be some issues that institutions might struggle with because they're new. So all I can say at this point is really, we appreciate that you're doing your best. And, if you have any other further concerns about it, or you want to talk more about it, please, as I say, just give Wendy a call or send her a quick email and she'll be pleased to talk with you about it further.
Okay, and maybe we can follow with, nobody asked that question today, but I know it's a very frequently asked question at the CCAC. So lots of people actually ask us, are tadpoles to be included on the animal use data form?
So yeah, it is one that we have we receive a lot. And so yeah, we include them because we particularly, I know they're not fish, but in the fish guidelines we had a lot of this discussion, and it was agreed at that point that eggs and larvae of fish and amphibia that have not yet reached the first life cycle, in which survival is expected, would not be included in the animal use data form. But as far as I'm aware, because tadpoles are likely to survive and can independently feed, then yes, they should be included.
We lost audio. Okay, I think we experienced some technical difficulty, surprise, with our audio.
I think it was a tadpole question.
It was a tadpole question, and we'll make sure that the question and the answer will be included in the email that will go to you. Don't worry, we want to make sure that everybody knows the answer to that tadpole question. So maybe we can follow with Elizabeth's question, and her question is the protocol description basically the LACE summary, or could you put the title of the protocol there?
In general, titles of protocols don't give enough information for us to be able to assess the purpose of animal use. I would say if you're also giving us keywords, then the protocol title is probably sufficient. But if you're not giving us keywords and you're just going on a protocol description, then it needs to be a protocol description, because we need enough information in there to be able to determine not only what the purpose of the study was, whether it was a teaching protocol or whether it was a testing protocol, but we also need sufficient information to determine what were the procedures that were actually carried out on the animals. And that's, that's really important, because that's what we base the categories of invasiveness on. What was it that the animals were actually experiencing?
Okay. And we also received a question from Maureen, who asked, will there be a limit on the number of keywords or any limit on the description? If they go over, will it be truncated somehow?
Okay, so this is a really technical question that without my technical assistance here, I'll struggle a little bit to answer. As far as I'm aware, no. I don't think there's anything that will truncate your answer. So as far as I'm aware, there's no limit. Now again, I'll double check that with Wendy, but my understanding is, yeah, that you can put as much as you like in there. I mean, obviously, if it's short and succinct, it's easier for people to review. but I don't think there's a limit.
Okay. And what if animals are only observed in field studies? Should they be included on the form submitted to the CCAC?
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about this actually, and this is really, if there's absolutely no manipulation or animal interference of any kind, so if you're not disturbing a colony of birds or you're not having any impact on them, then those animals aren't to be included on the animal use data form.
And what about a project which is a collaboration between two institutions? Who would you say is responsible for reporting the use of animals in this case?
So yeah, this is a question that we're also sort of asked from time to time, and I think that we're actually working on clarifying our policy statement about this now. But in general, the institution in which the animals are housed is the institution which should be responsible for reporting the number of animals used on their animal use data form. Obviously, you need to have a discussion with the institution, the other institution that's involved beforehand to make sure that's clear with everybody concerned, so that only the institution responsible for housing the animals is reporting the animals. Having said that, you know, there are instances such as places that have field stations and they've got researchers coming from everywhere to work with animals out in the field. And in that instance, it's probably much more sensible, much more convenient for the host for the institution where the investigator is based to report the numbers of animals that he used in his field study. So in general, it's where the animals are housed, but it really is a little bit of a case-by-case situation, and you just need to make sure that you've discussed with both institutions so that you don't report double the number of animals.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Griffin. So this is the time we had for questions, but please note that we will keep all your questions on file and make sure that we answer all those questions and send the responses to all the participants, and we'll send these shortly. And on behalf of all the members of the CCAC Secretariat, Dr. Griffin and I thank you for your participation and wish you a great day. You may now disconnect.